Hello and welcome to this coding lecture on datasets and data loaders. You can see here I have loaded this linear regression dataset data loader start script, and this basically reflects the code that we have created with the batches before. So now what we are going to do is basically, after we have created our independent and dependent features, we are going to create a new chunk on which we are going to create it first a data set and then the data loader. So for this we are going to create our linear regression data set, and this one inherits from the dataset class. The dataset class needs to be imported, of course. So we need to import it from Torch utils data, and from this submodule we are importing the dataset and the data loader. So we can run this, maybe all chunks until the one where we are currently creating the code. Okay, so now we can create our dataset class, and as you have seen before, the dataset class requires some functions. So the first one is the init function, in which we are going to pass in the independent feature and the dependent feature, and then the internal objects x and y are populated with the data that was passed in during the instantiation of this object. Then we need to set up another function for length. So everything that this function is doing is it's returning the length of the complete data set. And then we need some implementation of the getItem function, which is accessing the internal objects with self, and then you can pass in some index, and it is returning the independent features at this position of the index and the dependent features. So this is everything that you need to do to set up successfully the dataset, and then we can specify the data loader, and we can directly assign it to the object that is called train loader. So for this, all we have to do is we have to call the data loader function, and we need to pass some parameters to this. So the first one is the dataset, and the dataset is basically created with the dataset class that you can see here, and in here the objects x and p, so the numpy version of the independent features and the numpy array of the dependent feature are passed into this dataset class that we have just created, and we pass this to the data loader. So this is the required parameter. We also need to specify another parameter, which is the batch size, and we just leave it with a batch size of 2 for now. And you can see here there are many more parameters, so you can do much more with this, but for this introduction we are just leaving it with the required parameters, with the dataset and with the batch size. Now we can run this. So now we have some implementation of the dataset and the data loader. Then the modeling class is not touched. Everything is kept unchanged. We are also going to keep the loss function and the learning rate and the optimizer. The next change is coming in our training loops. Here you can see how we have implemented the batch sizes before. So we had to make sure that we are picking the exact right positions of the independent and dependent feature. So we need to make sure with the slicing that we get the right starting and end position. And we have to make sure to apply this at different points. Actually, one purpose of the data loader is that it is making our life a bit easier in this regard. So we are going to work on this inner loop and also how the data that we have here is modified. Okay, before we go there, we will just have a small excursus, and this one is going to check the train loader and what this returns. What we're going to do is basically we are going to make use of the enumerate function, and in here we are passing the train loader, and what we get back is some iterable of this training data that we have, and we can put this into a for loop, and then we get back two different returns. One is the position at which we currently are, and the other one is data. So we can run it like this, and then we can print, let's just print which batch we have here and then which data we can see. We can see here the 0th batch, and then we can see here the data is actually a list of tensors. And let's maybe try to understand this in more detail, because here in the data we have a first object, and that one is having the size of 2, that is the batch size, and then the number of features, and then we have the second object with the same size. What this is actually referring to is our independent feature and the dependent feature. So what we could also do is we could also say that we get back here a tuple of the independent feature and the dependent feature, and then we could print these two different objects. So this is basically how you have to understand the return values of the enumerated train loader. So this is what we are going to make use now in our training loop. So first of all, we are going to work on this inner loop definition, and we can make use of what we have just learned. So we have x and y, and we have enumerate train loader. All right. So now we have changed that, but that also means we don't need anymore these specific slices that we use here with the batch positions. And we also have to modify this y value, because now we are taking the updated y value that is defined here. So now we are passing in our independent feature in the forward pass. We get back the predictions, and then we make use of these predictions together with the true independent features during the loss calculation, and the rest is basically staying the same. So now we can run everything, and we should see that there is some decreasing development of the different losses. So it's looking like to be very stable already after a few hundred epochs. And you can see here, so it's converging quite nicely. So this is then providing the same results that we had before in the coding lecture. So the main takeaway of this coding lecture is basically that you have learned how to set up the dataset class with your custom data. So you have seen that you need to implement these three different functions. The init function, in which you pass in the data that you want to process. Then the length function, which is returning the length of the object. And then the getItem function, which is returning based on an index which is provided the independent and the dependent feature. And then the train loader is defining in very much detail how the data is going to be provided during the learning. So the two required parameters are here, the data set that you need to pass in and the batch size. And there is much more that you can explore. You can, for example, enable the shuffling so that the data is sampled from the training data, and there is much more to explore here. And then finally you have seen how you can include this in the training loop, so at which positions you have to modify the code to make it work and to pass in the return of the train loader into the training loop, and then the training is performed accordingly and you're done. So that's it, what you should learn about dataset and data loader. Thank you very much for watching and see you in the next lecture.